as you know, when people misunderstand or misinterpret things or misconceive things, it can cause problems, okay? It can cause conflict, okay? And nobody wants that. In essence, human beings want harmony and they want happiness. Did I expect him to understand telepathy? No, but I wanted to test for myself, right? What kind of organization I'm working with. And you know what? I'm glad I didn't get that job because it would have been shit. Then at least you've got some building blocks on which to make an informed decision, right? In which case, it positions you in a seat of wisdom.
Welcome everybody to another Martial Mind Power podcast, and I'm Jatinder with Sifu Lak, and we're going to be dropping some wisdom bombs again from the almighty book, The Art of Thinking Without Thinking. So Sifu Lak, how's your week been, my friend?
Yeah, really good. Very good, thank you. It's been very exciting. Martial arts classes have resumed in the studio. So that was absolutely fantastic. And everyone's really excited. Really wonderful to reconnect with everyone. And yeah, just a very good vibe, you know. It's been long awaited. We've been doing classes by Zoom, so it's wonderful to see all of those students in person as well. So yeah, it's been quite a moving week or so in that respect. And the energy that you get from the collective community is just amazing. And that's really one of the biggest reasons that I do it, is because it really leaves people could come into the dojo feeling deflated, depressed, dejected, and so on, from all walks of life, whether it's in their professional lives or personal lives. The moment they step into that dojo, it changes like that. And I know the moment they leave, the same doors they came in, dejected, depressed, and so on, it's completely different. All of that is gone away, and they're uplifted, and they're in a new frame of mind, and just a whole recalibration and reset that takes place in that dojo, and it's amazing. And that's for everybody, including myself. So and that's because of that collective energy, that, as they say, the collective consciousness. So yeah, it's been a wonderful week in that respect.
No, definitely, man. It's all about human connection, isn't it? Because that's all we can really do. It's the only thing on this planet that, without humans, there's nothing, isn't it? So yeah, good to hear you're getting back into classes. It must have been quite a feeling to be back with the students, right?
The first session back in particular was really moving, on not just physically moving, but also emotionally moving and spiritually moving. And I would say, hand on heart, there was a prevailing and permeating sense of overwhelming love in the room. And that is indescribable. And even those words don't do it justice. And it was just beautiful. Honestly, it was beautiful. It was powerful. There was a real sheer sense of love and joy in that room. And it was just amazing. So yeah, so nice. And it's wonderful that you can have that. I've always said that, my the JKD school is my JKD family, and it really is. It really is. And I'm always humble and privileged to have the opportunity to teach students and to help guide them on their journey using the martial arts and martial philosophy and physical, mental, spiritual cultivation. It's just amazing. And it's the pandemic's obviously had a negative effect on a lot of businesses, in particular martial arts in general. Obviously, there were some martial arts, especially those that were focused on kids, that expanded because the kids had nowhere to go. So parents looked at remote learning for kids, and martial arts schools that provided that. We tend to focus on adults predominantly, but we do cater for kids on a more of a private basis. And that's just personal choice. But it's amazing. It's amazing, how it all, the school did shrink, and all of a sudden it just bounced back, and it's just amazing. So it's this just amazing ability for things to kind of restore themselves. And the people that were out of training, because we provided Zoom classes throughout the whole pandemic, in particular the lockdown. So for 18 months, we were providing sessions through Zoom. And there's people that couldn't attend for several reasons. They either didn't have the space, they didn't have the privacy, they didn't have the money, because a lot of people lost their jobs, or were furloughed, and they were just barely making ends meet as it was, or people just didn't want to train through a streaming platform. So it's amazing that once things are kind of picking up and reinstating the studio-based classes, that people are bounced back, and it's just so nice to see them. No judgment, no nothing. It's just pick up and carry on as if it was yesterday, and that was the beauty of it all. It's just so superfluous.
Oh wow, that's so awesome. So Sifu, I mean, great to hear that, and let's see if there's some magical connection with the book. So as tradition, do you want to shout out stop?
Stop.
Okay, let's see. So, don't say what you mean, never mean what you say.
Oh, yeah.
And that is page 522.
All right. So this one, actually, I wanted to... So this koan, actually, I gave my students an opportunity to write some koans, and having in class been sharing koans with them and giving them so I normally give them a koan on a Thursday. They have the weekend to contemplate, or really, as you know from the book, the title tells you the idea is not to think, but for them to have the opportunity to get themselves into that meditative space where they're not thinking, then to kind of sit with the koan and see what comes to them. They would then come in on the Monday, and I would ask them if they received any insights or lessons from that koan. And as we did that for several years, towards the latter part of that process, I asked some students to come up with their own koans. Now, some of these koans weren't kind of not necessarily born out of spiritual sight or spiritual enlightenment, but from a practical standpoint, because one of the things that I wanted to do with this book was to make it easy and accessible for anybody to learn wisdom about various aspects of their life. So one of the things that you'll find in the contents is, if I can kind of pick this up without dropping it, there's several areas of life. You got your anger, fear, the art of martial art in martial arts, karma, and over on the other side, we've got gratitude, ascension, and enlightenment, living consciously, creativity, and so on. And this goes on for throughout the whole book. There's too many chapters or too many sections, should I say, to name. But really, if anybody's got any insights into various aspects of their life, or a specific aspect of their life, or something specific that's going on with their life, they can go to that chapter, and they could find a koan which will give them some guidance. That's the whole point. And some of these practical elements, I wanted to give my students a chance to do that. And this one, don't say what you mean, never mean what you say, is one of those that was written by one of my students, Matthew Fletcher. Okay. And so the actual writing in this section is inspired by his quote. Okay. On that note, I guess we'll go into it before we unravel and reveal what the koan actually says in the book. I'm going to pass it back over to you. What do you think that means?
Oh, what do I don't think? So what comes to mind is actually something that happened a couple of days ago when I was talking to sharing conversation with my mom. And it was interesting to see how the information was received because of the filter through which she was looking at it, you know? So I had said something which was taken to mean something else, which it wasn't, just because of the frame of mind beforehand was different. And after this conversation, I sat there thinking, wow, like, can you ever really mean what you mean without the other person taking it on board to mean something else, right? So that's what comes to mind when I heard this. When I read this one, I thought, okay, that relates to just a recent conversation, which was fascinating because, it's just what's going on with you at that moment in time. What's your train of thought? What's your experience of something? And when you hear something, are you making those associations close to what's just happened, therefore to see it through that filter, as opposed to thinking beyond that to say, hang on a minute, there's another angle through which what this could mean. So that's what comes to mind when I read that one.
So in neuroscience, we call that associative memory, right? So associative memory is when you're talking about something or someone, everybody's mind associates experiences that are related to that particular topic or person or thing to that. And as a consequence, there's a story that's created in one's mind. Okay. And when people talk, let's say you're the one receiving that verbal communication, you're making this story in your mind's eye. And as part of that, the things that you associate with that conversation and the contents of that and the context in which it might be is said, you're creating a whole narrative in your own mind about what that actually means. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what the other person is trying to communicate. So when people misinterpret things, they're essentially projecting their own experiences onto the words that they're receiving, and therefore creating a meaning out of it, which is not necessarily the meaning that the person talking is trying to convey. And that's why you end up with a lot of misconception and misunderstanding in communication. Okay. So it's really important that when we communicate with somebody, that we are able to articulate the meaning of the message. And the ultimate validation of what one person is saying to what's being received is by asking the person receiving the message what they understood that message to mean. And you'll find out if what they understood is the same as what you said. And if these match, then happy days, you've done a great job communicating. But if they don't match, right, then you fucked up. All right. So the person communicating has to then try to communicate that message using potentially different words, using potentially different body language, using potentially different analogies, metaphors, references, and what have you, in order to make sure that those two match up. Because otherwise you're going to get disconnect. And disconnects, as you know, when people misunderstand or misinterpret things or misconceive things, it can cause problems. Okay. It can cause conflict. Okay. And nobody wants that. In essence, human beings want harmony and they want happiness. And a misunderstood conversation a misinterpreted conversation is one that's going to create disharmony. So what we're looking for is congruency. And also what we're looking for is an ecology. That means people that are talking together, honoring and respecting one another. Congruency and ecology are the two key things when anybody's communicating. And
I was gonna say that with when you were sharing that, is that because what we said earlier on, like, you know, if the two people are not necessarily in sync because of whatever's going on with the people at that moment in time, then the way they take that information on board could be just based off that, and it doesn't, not necessarily the way you've communicated. It's just where they are, right? And so what you're saying about having that congruency is that it's like brings in the art of listening, brings in the the element of being present. But if you're present on both sides, then you'll find that communication is a lot more cleaner. But if the other person is spooling, just because as we go through life, we might have something on our mind, and you hear something through your spooling mechanism, it might not necessarily be taken on board as to what the other person, how they meant it, right? And that's fascinating, man. I find that concept so interesting that,
right,
it does require both of you to be in sync and be present and properly listening to each other to get the best out of that communication.
100%. There's a beautiful saying that says that in order to if you talk, then you're just repeating something you already know. But in order to learn, you have to listen. And that's where growth starts. Okay. So in order to really understand somebody's message, you have to be quiet, but not just be quiet and shut the other person off, but be quiet, be silent, but receptive and take in the message. Now, one of the other aspects of cognitive processes that happens is what in forensics is called cognitive bias. Okay, so when two people are communicating, or a group of people are communicating, people tend to bias towards the things that they know and like, right, and tend to unbias against things that they dislike. Okay. Now, in a conversation, it's really important that in order to prevent cognitive bias is to remain impartial. Okay. Now, to remain impartial means that you must remain centered and not be for or against, not like or dislike, right? Not come from this is a right or this is a wrong, or this is a good or this is a bad perspective, but actually just sit with it, right? And get all of the different perspectives. It's very hard to do, right? To understand different perspectives. Why? Because you have to be empathetic, first of all, and empathy allows you to step in somebody else's shoes, right? Metaphorically speaking, so that if you are having a conversation, let's just say with one other person, just to keep it simple, this is you, this is them. From your standpoint, you want to also be able to say, all right, if I put myself in their shoes, what would that conversation look like? Okay. How would I feel if I had to go into this position, right? And all of a sudden, you might experience something different. And you might also even agree, right? Even if there was initially a disagreement, but you may even agree that actually their perspective, I now understand why they're saying the things they say, why they feel the way they feel, and why they say the things they say, because you validated experience because you put yourself in their shoes. Then all of a sudden you realize actually there is no good or bad, there is no right or wrong, there is no like or dislike, there are just perspectives. Now, this is what mindfulness is supposed to help us to learn about ourselves, is that it's in essence, don't pick a side, right? There are no sides. We're all on the same side. If you wanted to pick a side, there is only one side, and it's us, right? So it's about learning to see things from everyone's perspectives.
Right. I know it's just that's just insane, isn't it? Because it's again, it's funny because when we go through life, most of the time, obviously, because we're in our own mind in our own conversation. And it's easy to get distracted with your thought processes and whatever's going on in the moment, right? But the thing is, it's like that time when we spoke about, communication is a two-way thing, right? And I think sometimes people forget this, that it is a two-way thing. And it's not just about you, your point of view, it's about their view and their point of view as well. Like you said, the empathy, jumping into their shoes, being able to also think, well, what is this person saying to me, right? And how am I also coming across, right? And that dynamic, that matrix, that dynamic that goes on between the two people, it's like, creating rapport and synergy, right? Yes. And being on the same frequency and almost level. So, I suppose that one of the things we could say to people is that when you are communicating with people, just do your best to be present, just be in that moment right now. Like I said, listen, quieten the mind, just observe, listen to what's being said so you can actually see it objectively as opposed to subjectively, right? And not be of one side or the other, but just be there to see the person, to really see the person and hear the person for what they're saying. And then, right, have a response once you've kind of, taken that on board.
Absolutely, man. And on top of that, it's, I wanted to just, I shared this with a friend earlier on the week, and I'm just going to read this. And I sent him a few separate quotes on this. So in order to first of all listen, there has to be a level of silence, right? Mm-hmm. And Charles de Gaulle, he famously said, silence is the ultimate weapon of power. Okay, because when you're silent, you're listening and you're assessing and you're learning what's happening in and around you, right? And you're best positioned then to make an informed decision based on everything that's happening, okay? Deepak Chopra, he said, to make the right choices in life, you have to get in touch with your soul. To do this, you need to experience solitude, which most people are afraid of because in the silence, you hear the truth and know the answers, right? So when you're listening in this silence, you receive the information, you translate that, understand that, and then, only then, in that silence that you sit in, whilst you're listening, you can allow yourself to allow the answers to come to the surface, all right? It's the person that responds with a knee-jerk. We all know somebody that talks before they thinks, all right? And and they tend to put their foot in it, or they tend to be put themselves into awkward positions, or say something that's insensitive or hurtful, or maybe sometimes cruel, not intentionally, but unintentionally, which is even worse because they're not reining it back. And that's
it's like an autopilot reaction. Just happens. They just do it. Yeah. And
it's not because they're bad people. It's because of the way their mind works, the way their brain works. We all have the amygdala, which is our primal core within our brain. And it's our emotional center in our brains, okay, in our minds. And what happens is, if we are very emotional, what happen is those thoughts that fire through that are unconscious. Now, we all know unconscious thought is quicker than conscious thought. And because of that, somebody that's very emotive will respond like that and then think later. Somebody that's really well calibrated, all-rounded, right, will hold that back and able to control their unconscious reactions, but respond intelligently, okay, by taking it all in. And that's ultimately where we want to get to.
I just want to share that just happened with me just literally right now, right? When you said the amygdala, yeah, I heard it as amygdala, and my brain went, dollars? What's it? Right? It just happened as we were talking, and that's like funny.
That's your associative memory thinking about money, isn't it? That's so funny. You know, Euripides said, silence is true wisdom's best reply. Okay. So again, just more kind of inspirational quotes around silence and the power of silence. You know, people many times construe silence as being a weakness. It's not a weakness, right? It takes a lot of self-control to be silent and listen, right? People talk to respond rather than to listen first. And we really need to understand to do that, and to do that well, in order to really appreciate what somebody's trying to communicate to us. The other thing is the other aspect is, you know, when you get really comfortable with somebody and you tend to become lazy in your communication as well. So you may not necessarily articulate your message clearly. And therefore what happens? The other side doesn't understand what you're on about. And it could be a source of more conflict, right? So it's really important that we try not to be lazy in our communications, especially with loved ones, because they're the ones that get the lazy communication, because you take it for granted, right? You know,
it becomes an assumption, isn't it? It's just like a subconscious assumption where we just think, oh, they know what I'm talking about. But they don't really, because they might just take dollars.
But they don't, because they're all thinking about, I made dollars. Right? So we have to be careful. You know, we're all guilty. I'll put my hands up first. Okay, we're all guilty that we can be lazy in our communications, especially with loved ones, right? Especially with loved ones. They're your best and worst critics. Okay, and what they've got to say to you, sometimes you love it, and sometimes you're going to hate it, right? So, but that feedback mechanism loop that you're getting, especially when they feel offended or upset by something you said, is because maybe you haven't really conveyed your message properly, because most people in a loving relationship don't mean to hurt one another, right? So how does this happen? And it happens because it's lazy communication, right? So that's another aspect of this koan, is how does the recipient end up misconstruing a message, right? And, you know, having said that, sometimes you could be really trying hard, right? And to make a conscious and conceited effort to communicate your message to the recipient, and whatever happens is not going to work. Why? They've already made their mind up, or there might be other prevailing factors. You don't know, but doesn't matter what you do, nothing's working, right? So then what? Okay, so there's so many dynamics in human communication that it's a complex field. Okay, but ultimately, don't say what you mean and never mean what you say is important, because one of the key things that this is alluding to is the other aspect of communication, and that other aspect is about based on the premise of when you're communicating to someone and there is a fear factor involved. And let me explain the fear factor of communication. That fear factor of communication could be you need to talk to your boss and you want to say something, but you're scared to say it. So you may skirt around the topic, or you may not exactly want to say it directly with fear of offending or upsetting or alienating yourself with your boss. So what happens is you don't say what you mean because you're not saying what you're meant to say, right? So you end up saying something completely different. And when you say something completely different, the idea is when you don't say what you mean, you never mean what you say. So the other person's not going to understand what you're saying, or may use that as an opportunity. They may know what your trail of thought is, but they may not acknowledge you because it's not convenient for them, doesn't suit their agenda, whatever it might be, right? Again, 1,000,001 reasons why they might not understand. But most importantly of all, you've not said what you mean, therefore you never mean what you say. And when you get into a habit of doing that, then you constantly, you start to develop a habit of essentially fabricating what you're saying, but not what you're meaning. And you tend to start lying to yourself, right? In your communication, right? And if you start lying to yourself in your communication, it creates an incongruency in your own spirit, your mind, and your body. And the only person that's going to get upset, right? Or should I say the first person that is going to get upset because you're not getting the outcome that you want is you, because you're lying to yourself. You're not saying what you mean. You have to speak your truth to attain the truth at the end of it. But you have to have the courage to be able to communicate that in a congruent and ecological manner. It's come full circle. Right at the beginning of this conversation, we started talking about, it's about congruency and ecology, right? And this takes us back to Bruce's famous teaching about honestly express yourself, right? Now, this is a good time to read this koan out, because I have referenced that in here, and I'll also show you guys the picture here. Don't say what you mean, never mean what you say, okay? And there's a picture of a gentleman holding his head in frustration because it looks like he's trying to say something, but he's not saying what he means to say, and he's now become frustrated because he's not getting through to the people he needs to get through to, or not getting the outcome that he's hoping to achieve. And that becomes a really frustrating process. So this koan reads, a close friend of mine, Matthew Fletcher, once said, if you don't say what you mean, you'll never mean what you say. Bruce Lee famously said, honestly express yourself. It is very difficult to do. I mean, it's easy for me to put on a show and be cocky and be flooded with a cocky feeling and then feel like pretty cool. Or I can make all kind of funny things. You see what I mean? Blinded by it, or I can show you some really fancy movement. But to express oneself honestly, not lying to oneself, now that, my friend, is very hard to do. I go on to write, the truth is, most people are afraid of speaking the truth because quite often the truth hurts and offends people. Now, being honest with yourself and others does not mean you have to be rude and obnoxious in expressing your opinions and feelings strongly to others. Rather, true, honest self-expression is done with emotional intelligence, honoring and respecting one another by creating rapport and trust, whilst maintaining congruency with your body, mind, spirit, values, and beliefs, and maintaining your ecology. Only then can you really do you, be you.
Okay. Isn't that a bombshell in itself? Like, you know, we often talk about being authentic. We often talk about how do you be true. And we end up becoming a lie because we don't share that truth. So it's like Napoleon Hill talks about hypnotic rhythm, isn't it? He talks about how certain things just creep up on you. And one day you turn around and think, well, how did that come about? How did I end up doing that? And it's happened because, you know, like you said, you might go to speak to your boss and you haven't expressed what's on your mind because one, you may not know how to express it and you don't want to get angry and have an outburst. And two, because you've just held back for whatever fear, right? And you do this over and over again. So you end up lying and eventually it just becomes okay. And that's what you call hypnotic rhythm because it's just dug itself in and you're doing it subconsciously. And now you don't even know why you're doing it, right? Yeah. So it's not been addressed. So you're letting the lie kind of fester while like onion layer skin, things are being built on top of it. Yeah. So it's really, really fascinating to be able to tap into being able to honestly express yourself. And I love what Bruce talks about there. That is a hard thing to do. And that we need the awareness of it and just somebody bring it to light to say, hang on a minute, this is such a thing as well. Right. Yeah. And, you know, that's what we're trying to hopefully do is just ignite those sparks within people just to say, hang on, there is another way to do this there, you know, and earlier on also what you mentioned about, you know, not being rude in how you talk to people. That takes a bit of skill as well, right? Because sometimes you might just outburst because you just share your truth about something. Yeah. But like you said, but if you do it with emotional intelligence, I think the best thing to do is just come from a place of vulnerability and from your heart and just talk and share whatever's on your mind in that soft tone and put it out there as opposed to just going bang, 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 right? And I think that'll hold people in a good space if they ever need to honestly express themselves.
That's right. I mean, in the first book I wrote, Master Your Life, there's a massive section called Honestly Express Yourself. And it's based on cultivating human communication. And it's the biggest section in there. It's so vast in terms of the science behind it and the physiology behind it, the verbal, the non-verbal, that if everyone worked on that, or if this was something that was taught in schools, we'd be able to understand one another better. You know, I once, because I contracted for many years, and I once had an interview for contract, and the interviewer said to me, he goes, "What's the best form of communication?" Right, and in the moment, I turned around to him and said, "Well, ultimate communication would be telepathy, right? Because then I would know exactly what you mean." But not everyone's telepathic. So then I started talking about human communication aspects. And I didn't get that contract, right? Because the feedback was, right? The feedback was I'd started talking about telepathy, right? And he didn't understand it. He didn't understand what I meant, right? But I knew, and you know what I mean, because if you know exactly what I'm thinking, and I know exactly what you're thinking, there is no words that need to be expressed. Okay. Now, not everybody's telepathic, right? And therefore, not everyone's got the ideal form of communication. Okay. The other way of ideal communication is tuning to another person's energy and understanding where they are. All right. That's an energetic imprint also can tell you a lot about what's happening with the person. Right. Now, in a corporate environment, this is one of the problems, right? We are so dehumanized that we can't even have a conversation about telepathy, right? Some people might say, well, Lak, you deserve not to get that job. Well, do you know what? I said, fuck you, right? You know why I say that? I say that because actually the corporate environment is so sterilized and dehumanized. Actually, we're only acknowledged for the academic qualities and skills and experience that we bring, right? And all of our human elements, our spiritual elements, our non-mental, our non-physical attributes are not acknowledged, right? Therefore, things like empathy, things like kindness and compassion, right? Things like even love, right? These words are not used in that environment, right? So did I expect him to understand telepathy? No, but I wanted to test for myself, right? What kind of organization I'm working with. And you know what? I'm glad I didn't get that job because it would have been shit. I would have been shit. And I tell you why it would have been shit, because it would have been a dehumanizing environment, because they're not open to that. The jobs that I have got and done really well in and flourished in are those kind of jobs where there has been that element, because people humanize one another. Now, that's not always the case, okay? But where that happens is you're honored as a being, as a human being, as a spiritual being on a human journey. And that's more important than just being a number. And a lot of people that are just a number, they might make a lot of money. As I say, they make a living, but they don't make a life. They don't make a life because they're not fully embodied in life, because those aspects of their being are not being honored. So they're alienated. And because they become alienated, there's apathy, right? There's an ignorance to that aspect of that person. And in the end, you're going to feel dejected. And a lot of people in the corporate environment feel like that. They feel it's sterile. No one's touching their souls and their spirits with what they do, even if what they do may not necessarily have huge meaning in their life or other people's lives for that matter. I'm in financial trading systems, right? And that makes a few people rich, okay? Right? But how does that affect the general populace? Not at all, right? And how does that add meaning to life? Well, not very much, okay? But it makes a living, but doesn't make a life. And that's why those aspects are really important, okay? Really important. So I'm just kind of bringing some wider context into some of my personal experiences where, I've pushed myself out there to say, okay, this is where I come from. This is how I'm being authentic to myself, because I want to work in an environment where I see you and I also want you to see me. And if you don't, then it's not right. And you know what? That particular role wasn't. So it was interesting because I think life's too short not to really be true to yourself. And I wasn't afraid of not getting that job. I'm more, I wouldn't say afraid, but it would be worse if I end up in a job and nobody would see me, right?
I totally relate to that, Relax, because I just reminded me when I went for my first kind of job. Went there and had the interview, and the guy interviewing me said, well, what do you think of our current website? It just came out, Lax. I just went, it's rubbish, right? It just came out. and I was like, I said this, and then that feeling you get, like, oh my goodness, what have I just said? Yeah. But I heard the guy laughing, and I went, I just like paused for a moment thinking, why is he laughing? And he said, he just started laughing, and he said, just elaborate on that a bit more. So I just kind of explained. I said, well, because, these things are missing. It's a bit like this, a bit like that. I got the job. Yeah, I got the job. And I was like thinking, oh my goodness, that's just insane, right? But it's like you said, because it was like a moment of just honestly expressing myself, right? And I didn't mean no harm by it. I just responded with like skill and knowledge in that moment. And there was another time when something similar happened when I went to do some potential work with this business mentor that I knew, and similar situation. He said, okay, you've probably tried to research me. And I said, yeah. And he said, what do you think of my website? And I said, again, it just came out, I think it's rubbish. And he just started laughing, like, why? And I said, I can't find you online. And what I did find was just a little picture of you. And he said, I think me and you need to have a conversation. So I totally can relate to what you're saying, because if you're not in those, if the other person doesn't see it in that way, like you're talking about this corporate environment, if you had worked there, you probably wouldn't have enjoyed it, right? And when these places I worked, I did actually enjoy it because they treated you human. They took on board what you had to say, and they were open-minded to it, and yeah, it's just it's just interesting when you were sharing that just popped in my mind.
So I think the key thing that we need to share with our listeners and viewers is, how do you say what you mean without offending people, without being rude, without being obnoxious, without being insensitive, without being hurtful, without being cruel? Okay. So I want to let you go first.
No, absolutely, man. That's just such a brilliant thing. Do you know what it is? I do feel that it requires a bit of practice as well, because the way I look at it, if you look at, I like using the analogy of a neck-top computer, like your brain being a computer, right? And when you look in IT, you have a computer which is input, process, and output. That's what a computer does. But what makes a human being different is input, process, output, assess, and calibrate, right? So when you've done something, you can assess it, right? And how it came back, and think, hang on a minute, okay, this is what I did, this is what happened. What if I tried it like this next time, right? Yeah. There's no such thing as hindsight. We always say, if you had to do it again, you can't do something again that's gone, right? But you can take that information and knowledge to your next version of whatever may pop up for you, right? So if you've done the assessing and you've calibrated, now, but consciously, because it does require you to have a present moment. I had a conversation with someone, a friend through Facebook, who was talking about biochemical changes in the brain. And that usually happens when you're able to actually consciously make some sort of decision. So if you're consciously acknowledging what you've done, you're running through that process, and in your mind, you're creating a biochemical change so that the next time around that you come to that situation or scenario, you're doing something differently. Yeah. Right. So I think that's one of the things I could say is that, assess it. You might do wrong in the situation. You might get it right. But whatever happens, it's on you to reflect on it. So once it's happened, you've gone away, you got a moment, think back on it, sit in that moment, reflect on it, and think, okay, if I had done that differently, what could I have done? Right? Play it out, play that scenario out in your mind. And what you'll notice is the next time it happens, you now have more options in how you respond. Right. And you'll get to a stage where your brain just automatically then starts to behave in that manner. So once you said, actually, this works, the next time your brain will automatically do it in that way. So it allows you to create autopilot programs once you've consciously programmed them. And that's one of the tips I can give on that.
That's brilliant, because essentially what you're talking about is the process of learning and growth, self learning and self growth through self assessment. As you know, what somebody famously said, that the message of your communication is the feedback received. If you get negative feedback, that message has not been received the way you want it, especially if it's a positive message that you were trying to send. Unless of course, you're sending a negative message, in which case you're likely to get a negative response. But if the feedback that you're getting doesn't match what you're meant to, the message you're meant to be conveying, there's a disconnect. So that goes back to the bit where we were talking about that, or where we were talking about that happening.
And that's a good practical example on that. Is that in like people working in the workspace, if you're getting customer feedback, right? If you're getting negative reviews, if you're getting all this customer feedback, somebody's saying something to you and it's not working and you're thinking, hang on a minute, what is this? Don't take it as criticism, take it as constructive criticism and think, hang on a minute, what is this and how can I address it? Right? And that way allows you to then sort the problem out, as opposed to just letting it build up in the background.
And that is gold that you've just shared. And I hope people realize that you've just shared gold. And the reason I say it's gold is I often do questionnaires and surveys, or ask my students in my martial arts school what they want, or if I've got an idea, whether they're up for it or not, because your audience, your community, your customers, your clients, your patients, whoever it is that you're serving, they'll tell you exactly what they want. You need to listen. And if you ain't listening because you're letting your ego get in the way, then shame on you. Guess what? You're not going to grow. And you're going to probably regress, because they'll go somewhere else. They're going to spend the money anyway, or they're going to put their time into it anyway, right? They'll just go somewhere else where somebody is listening and giving them what they want. So it's really important that you do listen, because otherwise people will move away from you. And this is not just those set of people. Also, let's look at relationships, friends, partners, right? If you don't listen to them, they will move away, right? Either mentally or even physically. So we must honor them, right? By listening to them and at least showing that we've taken their feedback and comments on board. You don't have to listen to everyone, because not everybody's right. Not everybody's got some people are only thinking about themselves, which won't save the greater whole, right? Or won't serve the greater whole. Sorry, I meant to say. In which case, you don't do that, because you've got a bigger picture in mind, hopefully. So sometimes feedback is not relevant, or it's selfishly presented, which you can understand, but it doesn't mean that that's how you're going to need to do some things going forwards. But if it's going to holistically serve you and your customers, and so on, or the relationships with the other parties that you have, then ultimately, you want to try and create a win-win situation. And when you talk about congruency and ecology, the idea for that is to create a win-win. That's the top of the triangle, a win-win situation. If you do something where only you win and they lose, guess what? People are not stupid, right? Don't try and trick people. Don't try and manipulate people, because we talked about this, rapport and trust, they go hand in hand. If you break trust, you break rapport, and guess what? It disappears. They go away for good. They're not coming back, no matter what you do. Right? So be careful, right? How you do that. So when you do mean what you say it with an ecology, say it with a congruency, say it with a win-win situation. But the other thing I would say is, in order to, so my answer to how would you help people cultivate that is really be true to yourself. Mm-hmm. What is it? What is it that you're trying to say? simplify your message, right, to what it is you're trying to achieve. What is the well-formed outcome that you're trying to attain, right? Or you're trying to create, or whatever it might be. What is the well-formed outcome, right? And then how can you say what you need to communicate in your message, which matches that and elevates and lifts the outcome and allows that to come to the surface. But when you say that from the heart and you say it with genuinity, right, then even if the other people involved in this conversation disagree, they'll disagree peacefully. And that's an interesting concept. Peaceful disagreement. You don't always have to agree with someone, but when you disagree with someone, you don't always have to have a war. Yeah.
Absolutely, man.
You can do it with peace and harmony. And everyone's entitled to their perspectives, their views, their opinions, because they've got their own individual experiences. So not everybody's going to see it the way you see it. But if you come at it that way and put yourself in other people's shoes, that's the other aspect that we talked about earlier, you'll start to get better at it. And mindfulness, one of the things I was talking about mindfulness earlier, and it just briefly had mentioned, was practicing mindfulness helps you discard judgment. Okay. So all of a sudden, right, when you're having a conversation with somebody, you'll start that conversation and you'll finish that conversation without taking any judgment within that situation, within the context of that conversation. There is no judgment. It is what it is, as they say. Okay. And when you say it is what it is, that's a big thing, because all of a sudden, you start to become worldly and wise. Why? Because you now start to see and experience other people's perspectives. And then all of a sudden, right, in order to make a decision, you are now seeking everyone's perspective before you make a decision. And you become very critical of ensuring that the facts that are being presented in any conversation or any debate or any argument are correct, right? So they're factually based, right? And if they're factually based, then at least you've got some building blocks on which to make an informed decision, right? In which case, it positions you in a seat of wisdom, right? A seat of wisdom. And as they say, in a group of people, be the first to listen and the last to talk, to be the wisest in the room. Okay.
Absolutely, man. I think that's totally fantastic, man. I mean, like, so my kind of like final takes on it is that, you know, we hear that saying, you know, the truth shall set you free. You know, for me, right, personally, what that is honestly expressing yourself. You know, when you're able to, you know, tap into your side of you, when you're able to be not just honest with others, but honest with yourself more than anything else. And when you're able to be honest with yourself, I feel that will set you free, because now it's just, like you said, it just is what it is. You know, it's not like any polarized view on it. It's no heightened, elated, you know, depressed feelings or emotions on it. It just is what it is, you know. And I think that's a quite important one for me. So that's on that note. Are there any kind of final notes, any final tips you want to give before we close off today's session?
My final note or final thought for this podcast is going to be this. There are three truths, right? There's your truth, there's their truth, and there's the absolute truth that lives above everything, right? Mindfulness, non-judgmentalness, right, will help you ascend above that. Okay. So you'll see what I call the original truth. Okay. That's why the other book was called Original Truth, because ultimately that's what we're trying to achieve, is original truth. That original truth above that is, who are we, right? And when you start talking through that, then you've ascended, right? Then you start to connect to source. And that is a journey, all right? It's not something that's someone's, some guru is going to come along, click their fingers, and all of a sudden you got it. You still have to work on it afterwards. Okay. You may get sight. You still have to work on it afterwards. You may have an awakening. You still have to work on it afterwards. Right. This isn't just a moment where somebody switches a light on and that's it. That everything's illuminated, everything's going to be fine. You have to work on it. And it's a process. So be prepared for that. And this has been a very common message throughout the podcast. Everything will take work, right, and effort. And what I would say is enjoy the journey as you go through it, and be present in that moment as you evolve, as you cultivate your sword of consciousness, and you'll really start to come into your own, and you'll really start to honestly express yourself through a sense of truly knowing yourself. Self-realization is about realizing the self. Self-realization is about knowing thyself. Self-actualization is about being yourself. They all mean the same thing. I'm just using different words to connect with different people that have different meanings around that same thing, to bring it all together to who you are. And I really do wish everybody had insight into their original truth, and that way we would be more understanding of one another, and get on better as a human family on our home that we call Mother Earth. So I hope there's some messages that really kind of strike a chord with you guys and resonate with people, and you could take that and share that with your loved ones and your family and friends, and help raise the human consciousness through the podcast that we have here for you.
Wow, fantastic, guys. There you go, guys. If you want to find out more, obviously go to martialmindpower.com. You can get hold of the amazing book, The Art of Thinking Without Thinking. And we've just completed another Mr. or Mrs. Cohen from this book, right? And the Original Truth book is also available. So do check it out. You could get a hold of it from Amazon. And just check it out, share, absorb, learn, share, like, comment, and we'll see you next time. So thank you very much, Sifu Lak, and we'll see everyone next time.
And a final thank to Matthew Fletcher for his quote as well. So thanks.
Well done, bro. Thank you.